Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another edition of Collider Connected. This one coming at you live. I am Perry Nemroff, and I am beyond thrilled to be here with Chiwetel Ejiofor from Netflix's The Old Guard. Hello, hello, and huge congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. So I kind of hate admitting this, but it's a little hard not to make assumptions about, I don't know, just action movies or comic book adaptations. And this one so far exceeded my expectations, especially when it came to character development and character motivation. So as someone who has done comic book adaptations and action movies before, when Old Guard was initially pitched to you, did you find yourself making any early assumptions about the gig? And then how did it exceed your own expectations?
Well, actually, I mean, the first exposure that I had to it really was that I was going to meet Gina, Gina Prince Bythewood. And I, had loved a couple of films that she'd made before, Love and Basketball, Beyond the Lights. And so I was excited with just the kind of the idea of it, the initial idea of it, of her being, of her directing it, and just what that would bring and how that would, just because of the nature of how she works with people and the way she plays on these kind of interpersonal dynamics and really minds these sort of relationships in a very kind of poetic way. Actually, and I just thought that was going to be really interesting, seated into an action movie. And then, obviously, Charlize and the way that she approaches action, which I think is really incredible, and that she is able to find real narrative through physicality, in so many films and in this film. So I kind of knew going in that there was something that was going to be pretty special about it. And so once I'd spoken to Gina, and then I went and looked at the original comic book, the original graphic novel, and just felt that it was such a rich world. These characters were kind of amazing, and there was so much that was kind of philosophical and sort of existential angst that's sort of in there as well in the story. So, I kind of from the off felt that it had just a lot of different things kind of going for it that set it apart from, I suppose, sort of slightly more generic action fare.
Mm-hmm. As a writer yourself, do you think the traditional kind of protagonist versus antagonist storytelling format is, I guess, overrated is the word that I would use, especially because these characters feel more human because the Old Guard goes beyond that surface level descriptor?
Yeah, I think that is, certainly something that I'm always intrigued by and looking out for is where I feel sort of empathy and where I'm kind of drawn to characters, because having characters that are complex and sit within that kind of gray area is really interesting. That they do things that are morally and ethically ambiguous. At best, that's a nice way of describing it. But they have they have reasons. They have solid reasons, and sometimes they have reasons that you can be also emotionally connected to. So you really sort of understand. Why they're doing what they're doing, where they're going, with it, and also sometimes why that's the wrong course, because I feel like that does reflect life. I mean, having said that, I do also think that there is always space for just out and out villainy in films. I do enjoy that, but I love these characters because I do love their complexity as well.
So on Collider Connected, we always like revisiting some early inspirations. And one of my favorite questions to do that is, when you were younger, what movies and shows were you watching? And do you find that those early favorites have influenced the roles that you gravitated towards today?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I've always, I suppose when I was a kid, I just always used to love those kind of Sunday afternoon sort of films, black and white from the 30s, 40s, whatever that you'd catch, when it was like 3 or 4 channels here in the UK, and I used to really engage with it, just be transported by like Cary Grant movies and, Katharine Hepburn films, and them two together, like Holiday and stuff like that. And just feeling, just really excited by the storytelling, by the performances, Cary Grant was one of my favorite actors when I was growing up, because I felt like he could do anything. He could do comedy 1 minute, and then you watch North by Northwest and it's all this drama and Hitchcock. And so, so I think that I'd always aspired to telling lots of different kinds of stories, I suppose, because that's what my first interaction with film was actors who were just in a lot of different things, in a lot of different kind of guises. And I felt like that was the exciting thing about being an actor, being able to kind of peek into all these different worlds.
Is there any particular film on your filmography that you might credit for being the experience that gave you the most clarity as far as, the types of roles you want to take and what you want to do with your career? Because I know when you're first starting out, it must be scary to ever say no to something.
Yes, I think that, I think it's also important to, when you're starting out, to say no to things, to sort of try to narrow down as quickly as you can what it is that you really want to pursue, because yes, there is that temptation to sort of just go out and you just want to work, you just want to do anything that you can, and that is important. It is important to be doing it, but it's also important to try and be, as from as early as you can, quite selective about what you want to be engaged with, because it does define you. It does very quickly define you and the kind of performer you are and the actor you are and the world that you sit in terms of acting. So, but for me, I think when I was really beginning to start in film, I was lucky enough to work with Stephen Frears and Chris Menges on a film called Dirty Pretty Things, and that sort of radically changed how I saw cinema, how I saw film acting, how I saw the sort of poetry of the cinematic experience, as an actor, and the language of cinema. So I do really credit Stephen Frears and Chris Menges, the cinematographer on that film, for really introducing me to the kind of language of film.
I got a twofold question for you now. Do you have an example of a time where you needed to trust your own instincts on set and really trust how you felt about something, and then a time where you thought it should go one way, but a director suggested something and you're like, hey, you're right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I feel like it's so hard to even pinpoint times, because I feel like that is my experience almost on every single film, both of those experiences, of feeling that you kind of want to do a certain thing and that you are totally passionate about this direction and you feel that you're kind of completely right. And then, having that, I guess that sort of challenge of somebody coming in and saying they don't know if that is the right way. And I think that has happened to me several times, and I think that what that always creates is probably a third way, which is maybe even more interesting than either things, because that friction or that tension can also sort of spill into this kind of artistic discovery, which I think is kind of important. I suppose now I feel like I prefer to get those kind of conversations out the way as soon as possible, because I sort of want to know when we're on set that we've kind of thought and talked, about all of these kind of different ways that things can go, so that we're sort of in the same space, which was what was great with the old guard of talking to Gina so much at the beginning of the process, because we were able to really understand what we both wanted to achieve through the character. So it wasn't that we sort of landed on set and then were trying to figure out these two different ways of looking at it, I think it can work either way, but I think I prefer now to try and get those kind of tensions kind of worked out, beforehand.
Is there anything about your experience working with Gina that you're going to take with you to your own feature, your next feature as a director?
Yeah, I think she has a certain, she just has a certain calm, with which she approaches scenes. And I think that encourages in a sort of a relaxed and open communication with the other actors. There's enormous pressure, especially in a film of this size and these kind of many moving parts. There's enormous pressure on a director. I felt that kind of pressure, but in a much smaller scale, making a smaller scale film. But it was very real for me in that context as well. So I can only imagine what it's like with all of the, and to try and find that space to be able to communicate very directly with people and but to collaborate well is a real gift, and she really was able to do that, and it allowed people to express themselves, and to say what they felt, and I think you feel that in the story, and all of these characters, she's really allowed these characters to come through, by not kind of confining anything, and so you feel the kind of richness of all of these parts and all of this sort of inner life for all of these people.
Going back to the character motivations here, they're all just so well fleshed out, whether they can be, pared down to being right or wrong. Was everything you needed to do that for Copley in the original script, or did you maybe need to talk about, backstory to fill in those blanks with Gina and Greg to really paint that full picture just for you in your head?
Yeah, we did a lot of work, in the process, on the script, on the character, and changing things, because, you arrive at a script and, it's always a sketch, I think. It's always any character, even if it's taken from the graphic novel or if it's just written as an original. To me, when I read it, it's always kind of a sketch. It's sort of roughly drawn, because if you're going to play that part, you have to find where it overlaps with you. You have to find yourself in that character, and you have to find where it sits with you. And the thing that I was drawn to was that I felt a lot of empathy for the character in a way that I haven't felt a lot of empathy. I don't necessarily feel that degree of empathy for characters as I read them, but for some reason, his particular struggle in the story just really resonated with me, and I really I kind of felt that I sat with him, right from the beginning, and I kind of wanted to encourage that sort of engine for him, so that so potentially an audience could go through that experience as well, that they sort of sit with him a little bit, even though they question his choices, and there are sort of these muddled ethical, moral choices, but you kind of still sit with him through it. And I felt that was a really interesting space to exist in with this character. And so that, encouraging that and working with Gina and Greg, on that sort of becoming part of the story was the journey of making it.
I have a question about a very, very specific moment in the movie, but I want you to be able to talk about it freely. So just in case anybody out there has not seen The Old Guard, one, what are you waiting for? And two, just be wary of this question. So it's a reaction shot, and I feel like some might assume that's like a throwaway reaction shot. It's the moment where he's watching the security footage and realizes that Andy's put two and two together and realizes that Copley sold them out. So when you're shooting just like a quick beat like that, how do you make sure that you are expressing all the complicated things that he's thinking about in that moment?
Well, I think that, you need to, I think there's a lot of things that go into a moment like that. And I know that that it is a sort of small kind of moment in terms of temporally, it's just a kind of, but as you look around in the set there, if you were looking at the different images, there are a lot of stuff there that's on the desk that is, there's a photograph of my wife, there's a picture behind me of our wedding, there's a sense of what his life is, what his kind of motivation is, how he is seeing the world. And part of that is the conflict that he's in as we kind of go through the story. Part of that is where he sort of sits and how he's positioned in the narrative. And so finding that, which is about art direction, about, set design, about, just how you create the world around you, how you create the space that you're going to act in. What are the triggers for this character, and how does he sit in the world? And then, sometimes you look at what the sort of arc of his character is, where he is in that particular moment, and what the tensions are for him. And so then once you have, and you're able to kind of paint this whole kind of, this sort of world, then you can take those sort of tiny moments and they feel whole because they are sort of created as whole, if you like, what I've discovered as an actor is that once that is, if you are realizing something in its totality, that is communicated to an audience. An audience feels something, they feel something about that. They understand this character in a way, and it's because of all of that detail, I think.
It works really well the first time around, but when you rewatch the movie and know where everyone's heading, you feel the weight of that just 10 times more. I was so impressed by that. Sticking with spoilers here, what was your initial reaction when you read Copley's final scene in the movie? Are you immediately in that moment kind of, I don't know, forming hopes and expectations for round two?
I mean, I definitely feel like I was, as I read the whole film, I really was constantly thinking, in a way, like I would be really excited and interesting to see how and where these characters go, what their full further story is, so it is, it's definitely something that I hope to explore, because I think that they're so rich, these characters. They're so different from each other, and they're so rich in the story. They sort of interweave in the story in a really interesting way. And so I feel like this particular group could have some very interesting tales to tell.
Yeah, I need a sequel. I need a sequel very soon.
Yeah,
Where do you
that's what I'm
stand?
saying.
Where do you stand on the matter after all of this? Like, it crossed my mind. Let's say the pharmaceutical executive wasn't someone like Merrick, and it was someone who was purely in it for the science and not necessarily the profit. Having experience making this movie, does that change things for you at all?
I mean, not really. I mean, in a sense, not really. I mean, that the world of science and the world of big pharma and so on is constantly dealing with these kind of ethical, moral questions, and they do have to push against some of these ideas, and we have had examples, in recent times of people, hiking up the price of drugs, of really taking capitalism and avarice, that sort of greed, to these extraordinary lengths because people are desperate or people are in need and so on, and I think having a context for those kinds of questions is really valuable, but at the same time, it's inevitably going to be part of a system, a sort of capitalist system, that values finance in this way, So I feel like it's a very interesting area to look at and to discuss. It's not something that has easy answers. Of course, these companies can then create things that are beneficial. Of course they can, beneficial to all of us. And that's a wonderful thing, but it's constantly got to be looked at and weighed with the nature of kind of avarice and ethics, So, that's what this story sort of, in some part deals with.
This might sound like a stretch, but did Mordo's mentality come to mind much while you were playing Copley? Because I started to think, Copley wants to use a superhuman ability for everybody's benefit, whereas Mordo is on the side of just being hell-bent on taking it all away.
I did not make that. I didn't quite make that connection. But I mean, I felt like no, I didn't see much sort of overlap in a way, especially because I suppose with Mordo and the way that he looks at his capacity and his ability, is very kind of grounded, even though it's in that sort of mystical realm. It's something he so completely owns, and he has a psychology that is very complete in its own self-centeredness, in a way, that he understands himself in the world and his place in it in a very powerful way. Whereas Copley has a much more sort of insecure relationship to these things, that he is somebody who is driven by emotion and his own kind of past sort of failings in a way, and the things that he wishes he could rewrite, and even the kind of the way that he wishes he could rewrite the world, in a sense, So he has a kind of very different relationship to those kinds of rooted emotions. So when I sit into those spaces, as an actor, as you get into that headspace, I found myself in a very different sort of place. I think they're both really interesting to explore, which is why I'm excited about these characters. But I think they're very different.
As you should be. Before I let you go, I can't help it. I got to squeeze in one Doctor Strange question for you, just because I'm a huge Sam Raimi fan also. So have you spoken to Sam yet about the plans for the next movie, just to prepare?
I haven't. I'm very excited to speak to Sam. I'm very excited that he's making film, and so we'll see. Watch this
I like
space.
hearing that. Huge congratulations on this, Chiwetel. I'm very much looking forward to Doctor Strange, but let's go. Get an Old Guard sequel happening very, very quick. I need to know what happens next.
Excellent.
Thank you again for your time today. Thanks to everybody out there watching. Do not leave this without liking and sharing it. And please tell everybody you know about the Old Guard on Netflix.